The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the paper plate as my daughter-in-law set down a tray of cold turkey scraps in front of me. Steam rose for a second, then vanished, just like the respect I once thought was permanent. My son cracked open a beer, his laugh sharp and empty, while my granddaughter sat silent, eyes fixed on her lap. They thought I was too old to notice, too tired to matter. But as I stared at the leftovers on a paper plate, I already knew what I'd serve them next. Something far heavier than dessert. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The microwave let out a final beep, sharp and impersonal, like a machine announcing it had done its duty and wanted no part in what came next. Maggie sat at the far end of the dining table, not the head, not quite the foot, just placed where they had room. The floral cushion beneath her felt lumpy, like someone had swapped out the stuffing for old laundry. Her plate was empty. So was her face. Tina entered the room holding a dented foil tray, piled with turkey slices that had lost their color, their moisture, and all dignity. "Still good," she said, peeling back the foil. Steam rose for a second, then vanished into nothing. "Little dry, but you know, flavor's in there somewhere." She chuckled as she set the tray down between a bowl of stiff mashed potatoes and soggy green beans that still had cling wrap over the top. Everything looked microwaved. Everything looked like an afterthought. David leaned back in his chair, cracking open a beer with one hand, the hiss loud in the quiet room. "Mom's not picky," he said, nudging Maggie with a glance. "She'll eat whatever you give her." No one laughed, but he did anyway. A short, self-satisfied grunt that echoed louder than it should have. Maggie's eyes didn't move. Her hands stayed neatly folded on her lap. She stared at the food like it might speak first. Ella sat beside her, unusually quiet. She picked at the hem of her sweater with chipped nails, her face tense. After a moment, she leaned toward Maggie, her voice barely more than breath. "You deserve better than this." The words hung in the air like steam that wouldn't rise. Maggie gave no sign she'd heard, but her eyelids fluttered once, slow and deliberate. Tina took her seat across from Maggie, wineglass in hand. The red polish on her nails matched the flush on her cheeks. She always dressed like a woman expecting someone to be impressed. High heels in the kitchen, blouse cinched too tight. Her perfume drifted across the table in waves, floral and cloying. "To family," Tina said suddenly, lifting her glass. "We take care of our own, don't we?" David raised his can in kind. "Amen to that." Ella didn't move. Her glass sat untouched, the rim smudged from a fingerprint she hadn't bothered to wipe. "To family," Tina said again, louder this time, her eyes darting from face to face, looking for confirmation. Maggie raised her eyes, looked at her son. Her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter. She had loved each of them once. She studied them now like strangers in a borrowed house. Tina's smile was just a stretched line. David already had grease on his shirt. Ella had turned inward, small and silent. The food still steamed. Nobody moved to eat. Maggie reached for her fork, turned it over in her fingers like she was checking it for fingerprints. Then she set it down, untouched, her expression flat. "I think you're right," she said, her voice low but clear. Tina blinked, unsure if Maggie was addressing her or just thinking out loud. "Sorry. What?" Maggie met her eyes. "About what you said. We do take care of our own." Tina gave a hesitant smile. "Well, sure we do. But not always the way you think." The smile dropped. David paused mid-sip. Ella looked up fast. Tina's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Maggie gave no answer. She simply unfolded her napkin, laid it across her lap like a veil over a weapon, and took a sip of her water. Her gaze swept the table again, this time slower. Her expression unreadable. Outside, a car door slammed in the distance. No one spoke. A faint buzz from the fridge underscored the silence, low and humming, like the first note of a song no one wanted to sing. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Heavier, charged. Something unspoken had just begun. The door clicked shut behind her, soft and final. Maggie stood in her own entryway, the one with the scuffed hardwood and the faint scent of lemon cleaner still clinging to the air. The quiet felt different here. Less like tension, more like space. She didn't turn on the light. Her steps echoed softly as she passed the coat rack, the photo wall, the narrow hallway lined with baseboards her late husband had installed crooked but proud. Her hands didn't tremble as she entered the back bedroom. Their room, once. Now, just hers. She knelt in front of the closet, reached for the top shelf. A metal box waited there, square and solid, its hinges dulled with age. She tugged it down gently, careful not to upset the stacks of faded flannel and unused blankets above it. The weight of it grounded her. She placed it on the bed and opened the lid. Inside, papers, records, old documents tucked with the care of someone who didn't trust memory alone. At the very top, a yellowed envelope with her name in thick block letters. Maggie, do not discard. Her husband's handwriting. Familiar. Direct. She opened it. The first item was the deed. Her name alone. No and. No joint. Just Maggie Jane Rourke, owner of record, fully and legally. She'd forgotten that detail, or maybe buried it on purpose, like this box. Below that, a folder. She opened it and found notes, letters, bits of advice written in a hand that had once drawn blueprints on napkins. Her husband had built things, and not just with wood. He built with intention. One line, bolded in blue pen, jumped out. Never let go of what we built. Maggie stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't sentimental. It was directive, not a plea, a command. His words were always more blueprint than poetry. She set the folder aside, slower than before. The next item was an embossed envelope, cream-colored, its edges curling from age. The seal was raised, stamped with the old company logo, the construction business they started when they had nothing but a rusted pickup and borrowed tools. She hadn't seen that symbol in years. She ran her finger along the curve of the seal. A sound. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it without looking, screen lighting up her face. Ella, Grandma, I hated what they did tonight. The message sat on the screen like a candle flickering in the dark. Maggie didn't respond right away. She simply stared, letting it settle. There had been something in Ella's eyes at dinner, a guilt, a question. Maggie typed slowly, "Don't worry, I'm not done." She hit send, locked the screen. The silence returned. She placed the phone down gently, then looked back at the box, at what it held, at what it meant. They had all assumed she'd forgotten. That age meant weakness. That silence meant surrender. That grief dulled memory. But she remembered everything. The early years, working double shifts and falling asleep in paint clothes. The kitchen remodel she paid for by selling her wedding ring to cover a permit. David had promised to pay her back. He never did. He only took more. She closed the folder and ran her hands along the top of the metal box. Cold. Real. Unchanged. "They served me scraps," she whispered, voice steady. "I'll serve them truth." It wasn't said with venom. It was said like fact. She stood lifting the box and placing it inside the hallway cabinet, front and center now, not hidden. She wanted it accessible. Ready. Alive. The air in the house had shifted. This wasn't nostalgia. It was clarity. She had been waiting in plain sight. and now they'd given her a reason to stop. The bell over the office door gave a soft chime as Maggie stepped inside. "Mrs. Rourke?" came a warm voice from behind a walnut desk. "It's been a long time." Howard Carmichael stood, his reading glasses perched halfway down his nose. His tie was askew, and his gray hair was thinner than she remembered, but his handshake was still firm, polite, not performative. "Howard," she said quietly. "Thanks for seeing me on short notice." He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. "Please, sit. I was hoping I'd hear from you again someday. You doing okay?" "I've been better," she said. Then, after a pause, "But I've been worse too." Howard gave a respectful nod and slid his chair back in. The office smelled like aged paper and bergamot, and the walls were lined with framed degrees and hand-drawn architectural plans, blueprints from old local builds. Her husband's company had designed some of them. Once. She opened her purse and pulled out the deed. His eyes flicked across the paper, then narrowed as he scanned the signature. "Still in your name. Uncontested. No co-signers. No life estate. No trust. Just you." "I wasn't sure if I remembered right." "You remembered." He tapped the corner of the page with one finger. "Which means whoever's living in that house. David and Tina. They're not owners. Not even tenants under a lease." He pulled out a legal pad and wrote something quick, underlining it once. "They're tenants at will. Legally, they're just staying. With your implied consent." Her expression didn't shift. Not even a blink. "But if that consent is gone," he continued, watching her closely, "you're within your rights to have them removed." "Eviction?" 30-day notice minimum. No fault. Doesn't matter if they're family. Once it's delivered, the clock starts. And if they fight it, they won't," she interrupted. Howard paused, then nodded. She looked around the office once, absorbing it. The steady tick of the wall clock. The hum of the old radiator. The quiet confidence of people who work with paper and precedent, not tantrums and noise. "I want it drafted," she said, voice calm. "You're sure?" "I'm done with pieces. Done with guilt and pretending and giving them things they think they earned." She folded her hands. "Do it." Howard reached for a new folder and began pulling templates. "You'll need to sign here and here," he said, laying them out. "And I'll have my clerk notarize before close of business." She signed without hesitation. He flipped open his legal pad. "We'll include their names, list the house address, and note that your ownership is full and undisputed. 30 days to vacate. If they're not gone, we'll file in housing court." "And they'll be forced out?" "By the sheriff if it comes to that." Maggie nodded once. Howard leaned back in his chair. "Would you like the notice hand-delivered, or do you want to serve it yourself?" She thought about that. Thought about the microwave tray, the half-warm turkey, Tina's clinking glass. "Mail it and post it on the door," she said. "Let the walls tell them first." Howard smiled faintly. "That'll get their attention." He began typing. The rhythmic clack of the keys filled the room. Maggie didn't speak. She watched the cursor blink on the screen as her name appeared at the top of the form, in bold, in full, undeniable. When he was done, he printed it, 3 crisp pages. "Read it carefully," he said. She didn't need to. She read people better than paper now. She slid her reading glasses on anyway and read every word. At the end, she picked up the pen again. Signed. The papers made a soft snapping sound as he stapled them together. "Everything's in motion," he said. Maggie stood, collected her purse and adjusted the strap on her shoulder. At the door, she paused, glanced back at Howard's desk, the copy of the notice resting neatly inside a folder with her name. "Paper for paper," she murmured. "Fair exchange." Then she walked out, leaving the echo of old power rising behind her. The county administration building loomed like a relic. Gray stone, wide steps, windows that hadn't been washed in a decade. Maggie climbed them slowly, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding a manila folder flat against her chest. Inside, the air was cool and dry, tinged with copier toner and institutional coffee. A security guard nodded as she passed through the metal detector. No questions asked. She followed faded signs toward Clerk of Courts, Civil Division, heels clicking quietly on the worn vinyl tile. The walls were a dull eggshell, scuffed from years of foot traffic and bureaucracy. Maggie moved like she belonged there, not rushed, not hesitant. She had something to finish. The clerk's counter was framed by fingerprint-smudged glass. A metal speaker grid sat between two slots in the window. Behind it, a woman sat typing, her glasses perched low on her nose. The nameplate read, Janet Moore. Maggie waited until Janet looked up. Their eyes met. Eviction filing, Maggie said, sliding the folder through the opening. Janet pulled it toward her and flipped through the pages quickly, her well-manicured fingers moving with trained ease. She didn't ask Maggie to explain. The documents did that for her. Residential? Yes. Owner occupied. Notice served? Being posted today. Janet gave a quiet nod. She pulled a red-labeled folder from beneath the counter and placed Maggie's paperwork inside. Deeds clean. Timeline's right. You did your homework. I had help. Janet raised an eyebrow. Attorney? Maggie nodded. Janet slid the folder to one side and reached for the stamp. 30 days starts the day it's served. If they don't leave, you can file for a writ. Most judges don't need a hearing when the ownership's this clear. I don't want to fight, Maggie said softly. Then they should have respected the roof over their heads, Janet replied without looking up. She pressed the stamp into the ink pad, twice, then brought it down with steady pressure onto the first page. The sound was heavy. Satisfying? The seal bled into the fibers. Official. Irreversible. Maggie didn't flinch. Janet continued assembling the file. Do you want sheriff delivery? Yes. That'll cost you an extra $75. Add it to the filing? Please. Janet handed her a payment slip and nodded toward the credit card machine at the far end of the counter. Maggie walked over, inserted her card, and entered the PIN without hesitation. A receipt printed instantly. When she returned, Janet was already tucking her documents into a clear envelope. They'll deliver within 4 business days, she said. You'll get confirmation by text or mail. After that, it's just a matter of waiting. I've waited long enough, Maggie said. Janet paused. Her eyes softened slightly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer platitudes. Just held Maggie's gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then you're doing the right thing. Maggie accepted the envelope and slid it carefully into her purse, the edges pressed firm against the leather like a spine. Thank you, she said, voice steady. You're welcome. And good luck. Maggie turned and walked away. Her pace didn't quicken. She passed an old water fountain, the kind with chipped enamel and stale-tasting water, then exited through the main doors and stepped into the light. The air outside was warm, sun cutting across her face in long angles. The courthouse stood behind her like a judge that had already ruled. She stopped at the top of the steps, blinking against the brightness. Below, a young couple argued beside a parking meter. A child wailed somewhere across the street. Life moved in chaos, but Maggie's world had entered a new order, papered, stamped, and law-bound. She took one long breath. Her purse sat heavier on her shoulder than it had earlier, though the contents hadn't changed. Maybe it was the certainty that gave it weight, or the ending it carried. She turned her face slightly toward the breeze, and then, quiet enough for no one but the wind to hear, she whispered, Dessert will be served soon. Not bitter, not cold, just ready. The house smelled of overcooked meat and forced civility. It was Friday night. Family dinner again. David had grilled steaks out back while Tina reheated store-bought mashed potatoes and snapped at Ella to set the damn table without sulking. The television in the living room murmured low, tuned to a rerun no one watched. Maggie stood at the kitchen counter, calm, composed, sliding the last slice of pecan pie onto a polished silver tray. She wore her good cardigan, the blue one with pearl buttons, buttoned all the way to the neck. Her hands moved like clockwork. Exact. Unshaken. Tina poured herself another glass of red wine, muttering as she shoved the cork back into the bottle with her palm. You know, we could have just ordered out like normal people. David grunted from the dining room. Mom likes home-cooked. It's tradition. No one responded. A sharp knock at the front door broke the air like glass. 3 hard raps. Precise. Official. Ella froze mid-step, her hands full of salad tongs. Tina's wineglass clinked too hard as she set it down. David looked toward the entryway, brow furrowed. Who the hell? He opened the door. On the other side stood a uniformed sheriff's deputy, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, a manila envelope in one hand and a staple gun in the other. David Rourke? The deputy asked. Yeah, David said slowly, confusion rising in his throat. You and Tina Rourke are being served formal notice to vacate the premises under state statute. He held up the envelope. This is your copy. Another will be posted on the property. What? Tina barked, storming to the door behind David. What is this? This is a mistake. But the deputy was already unfolding the top page, positioning it against the wood siding beside the front door. Pop, pop, pop. 3 staples sunk in fast. Ella stood behind them, wide-eyed. Maggie was still in the kitchen, unmoved. David took the envelope like it might explode. What the hell is this? Who filed this? The deputy pointed to the header. Property owner, Maggie Jane Rourke. Questions can be directed to your attorney. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked back to his cruiser. Tina turned on her heel, face flushed and blotchy. Maggie? What is this? Is this real? Maggie stepped into the dining room, carrying the silver tray like it weighed nothing at all. Dessert, she said gently. Pecan pie. She placed it in the center of the table, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a single folded page. With delicate fingers, she slid it across the table toward David. It landed beside his plate. He didn't touch it. You filed eviction paperwork? Tina stammered. Against your own son? Against my tenants, Maggie said softly. David's face reddened, fists clenching at his sides. You can't just... I can, she interrupted. And I did. Ella lowered herself into her chair slowly, eyes flicking between them all. Her lips twitched, only slightly, but Maggie saw it. A restrained smile. Tina pointed at the pie like it had insulted her personally. So you invite us to dinner? What? To humiliate us? No, Maggie replied, picking up the pie knife. To serve dessert. The silence was so thick it could have stopped the clock. She cut clean slices, neat and even. Served David first, then Tina, then Ella, then herself. She didn't force anyone to eat. Tina crossed her arms and stared down at her plate like it was evidence. David still hadn't opened the notice. Ella took a bite, said nothing. Maggie lifted her fork, let it hover in the air for a beat, and then took a slow, quiet bite of her own. Outside, the deputy's car engine turned over, drove off. The sound faded. 30 days had begun. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her plate. Then, with a tone barely louder than a thought, she said, Now they have 30 days to chew on it. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and printer paper. One of the ceiling tiles was water-stained, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like anxious flies overhead. David sat at the end of the long table, arms folded tight across his chest, his jaw clenched hard enough to click. Tina sat beside him, visibly vibrating, her nails tapping against the table in sharp, angry rhythms. Ella sat a few seats down, quiet, phone in hand, screen dim. Maggie was already there when they walked in, sitting straight-backed, calm, her purse at her feet, a thermos of coffee untouched beside her. Howard Carmichael flipped open a folder on the table, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. "This is the original property deed," he began, sliding the first page across the table. "Filed June 8, 1987. Title recorded solely under Maggie Jane Rourke. No co-signers, no joint tenancy, no trust agreements." David didn't even look at it. "This is family property." Howard's expression didn't change. "It's not. It's a private asset, acquired with private funds, recorded in your mother's name only. That hasn't changed in 38 years. It was Dad's house, too," David snapped. "And your father transferred his interest to her prior to his passing," Howard replied evenly. "Legal ownership hasn't been in question, until now." Tina scoffed loudly. "Oh, so now we're just trash you throw out the second you're done with us?" Maggie looked at her, eyes steady. "I've been done. You just didn't notice." Tina pushed back her chair abruptly, standing up. "This is bullshit. She doesn't even know what she's doing. You think you're going to evict your own son like he's some tenant who skipped rent?" David grabbed her wrist. "Tina, sit." She yanked her arm free. "No, I'm not sitting through this circus." She stormed out, heels echoing down the hallway. David looked between the empty doorway and the stamped notice still sitting on the table. "She can't actually go through with this." "She already has," Howard said, "and I've filed your response to contest, just in case. But unless you've got a signed document saying she transferred ownership to you, you're wasting time. She said the house would be ours one day." Maggie didn't blink. "I said a lot of things when I thought you respected me." Silence. David's knuckles were white. From her corner, Ella lifted her phone slowly and tapped it once. The red dot of a recording app blinked silently in the corner. She angled the lens slightly, keeping it low, unassuming. "I know what's mine," Maggie said, voice low but firm. "And I know what I gave, and what you all decided to take." Howard slid another form across the table. "This is the response filing. It outlines the timeline, 30 days from notice. If you don't vacate, we proceed. If you contest again, the court decides. But so far, it's clean." David stared at the documents without touching them. "You realize you're tearing this family apart," he said. Maggie let out a breath. Not a sigh. Something quieter. Final. "You can't tear apart what's already fractured." From across the table, Ella finally spoke. "She's not the one who broke it." David turned sharply toward her. "What did you say?" Ella looked up, unfazed. "Nothing." She tapped her phone screen off. Howard stood, collecting the documents into a fresh folder and clipping them shut. "We're prepared for any challenge," he said, "but I suggest you spend your time packing." David didn't respond. As the meeting broke up, Maggie rose slowly. She collected her purse, her thermos, and paused at the door. Her voice, soft and even, carried just enough to linger. "They contest paper with air," she said. Then she walked out, her heels quiet, but her meaning thunderous. The front porch creaked as Mr. Carson lowered himself into the wooden chair beside Maggie. He wore his usual work jacket, faded brown corduroy with a missing button, and a hat that hadn't seen a new patch in years. In one hand, a porcelain mug with the logo of a long-defunct hardware store. Steam curled out, rising into the cool late afternoon. Maggie poured her own tea from the thermos and didn't bother with cream. "Smells like someone finally put Tina in her place," Carson said, not even looking over. "Heard the yelling from 2 houses down." Maggie gave the smallest nod. "Wasn't loud for long?" He sipped, then leaned back and let out a satisfied sigh. "You know," he said, "your husband and I built this block, every last house, poured every foundation by hand. We laid the bricks ourselves. Didn't subcontract a damn thing." He looked over at her then, eyes sharp but kind. "That deed of yours? It's iron. I'd stake my name on it." "I might need you to," Maggie replied softly. "You won't," he said, then reconsidered. "But if it comes to it, I'll be there. I saw what went into this place, what you two put up with. Hell, I remember you hauling drywall when you were pregnant." She smiled faintly. "That was the week the truck broke down. And no one helped but you. Not even David." A screen door slammed behind them. Ella stepped onto the porch and slipped around Maggie's chair, wrapping her arms around Mr. Carson without warning. He chuckled, but didn't spill his tea. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. He patted her arm gently. "Sweetheart, this ain't charity. It's called decency. Something your father must have dropped in a ditch years ago." From inside the house came the sound of a heavy footfall. Then the door swung open. David stepped out. Still in yesterday's clothes, hair uncombed, a deep crease across his cheek like he'd slept on his anger all night. He saw Carson and stiffened. "Mind your business, old man." Carson didn't flinch. "It is my business, David. I've lived next door to your mother for 39 years. I watched her pay every damn tax bill while you were off playing boss in a company someone else built." David's face darkened. "You don't know the full story." Carson took another sip of his tea, then placed the mug gently on the arm of the chair. "Son, I lived the story. I watched her take care of this house through your father's chemo, 2 storms, and 1 flood. When the roof caved in, she fixed it. When the furnace died, she paid cash. You? You just moved back in like you were claiming an inheritance." Ella crossed her arms. "You never earned it." David's mouth opened, but no words came. Inside, Tina's voice called out, sharp and agitated. "Is that man still here?" Maggie stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't tighten her jaw. She just looked at her son. "You can bark at neighbors and lawyers and paperwork all you want," she said, "but the truth is louder than you." David scoffed. "You think people are going to line up to back you?" Carson rose slowly, taller than he looked sitting. "She doesn't need people. She just needs the right ones." He turned to Maggie and tipped his cap. "If they push this to court, you've got my word, and my testimony." Maggie extended her hand. He shook it without hesitation. As he walked down the steps and headed back to his house, Maggie turned toward the yard, taking in the rows of hedges she had trimmed herself for years, the porch she had painted, the gutters she cleaned when David said he was too busy. She looked at Ella, then back at the doorway where David stood fuming, small in his own house. "They thought I was alone," she whispered. Then her eyes narrowed. "I wasn't." Tina never could keep quiet, not when she felt cornered. Late Sunday night, while David sulked in the garage and Maggie sipped chamomile tea by the window, Tina sat in the upstairs bedroom with a wine glass in one hand and her phone in the other. Her cheeks were blotchy, her eyeliner smudged, and her thumbs moved with the speed of spite. She opened Facebook and tapped out a post. "Imagine being old and bitter enough to evict your own family just to feel important again. Not my home. Greedy matriarch, Haas, try me." She attached a photo of the eviction notice, crumpled now, half-lit, but clearly legible, and hit post before she could second-guess herself. Then she smiled. Petty. Public. Just how she liked it. It was down in 30 minutes. Tina deleted it without explanation after David saw it and muttered something about legal consequences she didn't understand. But 30 minutes was enough. Way more than enough. Screenshots rippled through the neighborhood like spilled wine across white linen. Maggie didn't have Facebook, but Ella did. And within the hour, her phone lit up with 3 messages and 1 shared image, all from neighbors she barely spoke to anymore. The post, preserved forever in digital amber. Ella didn't reply. She simply downloaded the image, opened a new message thread, and forwarded it straight to Howard. Thought you'd want this. Howard called first thing Monday morning. His voice was steady but clipped. Focused. She really posted the notice online? Yes, Ella said. Briefly, but it spread. Everyone's seen it. That's gold. Absolute gold. You can use it? Oh, absolutely. Posting legal documents publicly, especially mocking court filings, can undermine any claim of confusion or innocence. She essentially admitted knowledge of the notice, acknowledged the legality of the eviction, and showed public contempt. It's textbook. Ella glanced out the window where Maggie stood trimming hedges again, slow and patient. Will it help Grandma's case? Howard didn't hesitate. It strengthens it considerably. That afternoon, Maggie sat across from Ella in the living room, the old file box open again on the coffee table. The air was filled with the faint hum of the dishwasher cycling in the kitchen. Ella placed the printed screenshot next to the original eviction papers. Maggie studied it for a long moment, not shocked, not even angry, just confirming something she already knew. She handed me evidence herself, Maggie said. Her voice wasn't smug. It was matter of fact, like a chess player watching her opponent remove their own queen. Ella sat back, smiling faintly. Reckless people tend to out themselves. Outside, a knock sounded on the front door. Maggie opened it to find Carson standing there in a clean polo and pressed slacks, HOA folder in hand. You got a minute? He asked. She stepped aside, letting him in without a word. He held up the printout. Got this from a neighbor. Post made the rounds before it vanished. I figured it should be part of the record. You're sharing it with the HOA? Already did, he said, pulling out a duplicate, and sent a copy to the board chair. They don't take kindly to public defamation tied to property disputes. Might not mean much now, but come court time? It'll mean something, Maggie said. Carson tapped the edge of the paper. This proves intent. She didn't act out of confusion. She acted out of contempt. Maggie nodded once, folded the image, and slid it into the box beside the stamped notice, tax records, and deed. Another piece in the file. Another nail in the narrative. Carson excused himself with a tip of the hat. Ella followed him out and watched him walk the few steps to his own driveway before she turned back to Maggie. You think they'll post again? They'll lash out, Maggie said. They always do. She closed the box gently, like it contained not papers, but power. They spread lies, she whispered. Then she stood. I collected proof. The community hall smelled faintly of lemon floor polish and folding chairs. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a tired, institutional glow. A low hum of conversation filled the space, neighbors catching up, gossiping in hushed tones, passing paper cups of lukewarm coffee. Maggie walked in quietly, wearing a navy wool coat buttoned to the collar. Ella followed close behind, clutching a slim black folder. Mr. Carson sat near the front, his posture straight, one leg crossed over the other, HOA folder perched on his lap. David wasn't there, but Tina was. She stood near the sign-in table flanked by 2 neighbors she barely knew, but smiled at like they were lifelong friends. Her lipstick was too red for a Monday night, and her scarf, loud leopard print, clashed against her beige sweater. Maggie took a seat near the aisle. Carson nodded to her, almost imperceptibly. Ella sat beside her, setting the folder on her lap. The meeting opened with the usual budget updates, landscaping complaints, a discussion about speeding near the elementary school. But then the chair cleared her throat and looked down at the agenda. Next item, community concerns regarding the Rourke property on Chestnut Drive. Tina stood quickly. "If I may," she said, already walking toward the front. The room quieted. She turned to face the group, planting herself just beside the podium. "My husband and I are being unfairly targeted," she began, "by someone who, frankly, shouldn't be managing a property alone anymore. Maggie Rourke is elderly, confused, and being manipulated into decisions she doesn't fully understand." The words dropped like spoiled milk in warm coffee. Carson's jaw tightened. Ella's nails dug into the edge of the folder. "She's being used," Tina continued, gesturing vaguely toward Maggie. "And while we all respect our elders, the truth is, she hasn't been active in the HOA for years. She doesn't attend meetings. She hasn't filed any community improvement requests. So, when she tries to evict her own family and create public spectacle..." Carson stood. Not loud, not rushed, but final. He walked slowly toward the front and stopped beside Tina, who glanced sideways, lips twitching. "You want to talk history?" he said, facing the room. "Let's talk history." The air tightened. "I've been on this block 39 years. Maggie and her husband helped build half of it. Paid dues on time. Shoveled sidewalks that weren't theirs. Trimmed hedges no one asked her to. When my wife passed, she brought food for 2 weeks. She didn't post about it. She just showed up." Tina huffed. "That doesn't mean she's..." Carson turned to her sharply. "She's never been confused. She's been patient. And you've confused patience for weakness." A few heads nodded. A few more murmured. Then Ella stood. Quietly, she stepped forward and opened the folder, removing 2 printed screenshots. She held them up, facing the room. "This is from Tina's Facebook," she said. "She mocked the eviction notice, called Maggie greedy, posted the court documents online, then deleted it." A ripple of whispers broke across the room. "She said Maggie was confused," Ella continued. "But this proves the opposite. It proves they knew what they were doing, and did it anyway." The board chair cleared her throat. "Thank you, Ella. We've received copies of those posts. And we have statements from 2 homeowners who documented the thread before it was deleted." Tina's face flushed. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The chair glanced around the room, eyes level. "Effective immediately, the HOA formally recognizes Maggie Rourke as sole property owner. Any defamatory posts or interference with legal proceedings will be documented and may result in fines or removal from community committees." A beat of silence. Then another neighbor muttered, "About time." Tina looked around, suddenly smaller than before. Her smile had vanished. She reached for her purse and turned toward the back of the room. Maggie didn't rise. She didn't gloat. She sat still in her chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. As Tina fled through the exit, Maggie whispered under her breath, so low only Ella could hear, "They lost their stage." The courtroom was colder than Maggie expected. Wood-paneled walls, rows of stiff-backed benches, a judge's bench raised like a pulpit. No gavel theatrics, just silence, the kind that weighed on shoulders and dried mouths. Maggie sat at the petitioner's table beside Howard. He had 3 folders open in front of him, his glasses low on his nose, a quiet fire in his posture. Across the aisle, David looked pale, worn, like a man dragging the weight of every bad decision he'd refused to name. Tina sat beside him in a charcoal blazer too tight at the arms, her lips pressed in a line so sharp it could have sliced drywall. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver streaks in her bun and readers hanging from a chain, glanced at the docket. "Rourke v. Rourke, residential eviction hearing, Both parties present? Howard stood. Petitioner is present and represented. Tina stood up before the judge even finished her question. Your Honor, I'd like to speak. Howard didn't flinch. Neither did Maggie. The judge motioned for Tina to proceed. This house was meant to be ours, Tina said, her voice loud enough to echo. My husband is her only child. Maggie promised it would stay in the family, that we could live there, take care of it. We've made contributions to the property. This whole situation is a misunderstanding, an emotional overreaction from someone who's being manipulated. Howard rose, calm as ever. Your Honor, opposing counsel, or in this case, the unrepresented respondents, have provided no documentation to support any claim of ownership, tenancy, or verbal contract. My client has filed a clean deed, dating back to 1987, supported by over 3 decades of sole tax payments, maintenance logs, and homeowners association confirmation. He placed the deed on the evidence table. This is the original copy, notarized and recorded. It's never left her name. Tina let out a dry laugh. So an old piece of paper means she can just erase her son? Howard didn't turn to look at her. He opened a second folder. We also have statements from neighbors, including Mr. Joseph Carson, who's here to testify. He's prepared to verify under oath that Maggie Rourke has independently paid property taxes, handled all maintenance, and never once referred to the home as community or inherited property. The judge looked toward the witness stand. Mr. Carson? Carson stepped forward, blazer pressed, hands steady. Ma'am, he said with a respectful nod, I've lived next door for 39 years. I watched Maggie shovel snow, fix her own gutters, pay those tax bills in person. Her son didn't move back in until after his business failed. I never saw him lift a finger, but I saw her carry bags of mulch with a bad knee. He paused. That house is hers. Always has been. There was no rebuttal. The judge turned to David. Mr. Rourke, do you have any documentation contradicting the deed? David swallowed. His lips parted, but nothing came. No, ma'am. The judge looked down at her notes. A moment passed. In light of the deed, supporting documentation, and credible third-party testimony, she said, this court finds in favor of the petitioner. The eviction order is upheld. A loud exhale from Howard. A stunned silence from David. Then Tina shot to her feet. This isn't over. The judge raised an eyebrow. It is, legally. Tina turned her glare on Maggie. You think this is a win? All you've done is destroy your family? Maggie stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even step forward. It was over the moment I stamped the deed, she said quietly. Tina stared at her like she wanted to spit. But Maggie didn't blink. Howard began collecting the folders, his motions smooth and unhurried. The courtroom buzzed again with side conversations and shuffling papers. The clerk called the next case. Maggie stepped into the aisle. Ella was already waiting outside, her phone in hand, ready to walk her grandmother to the car. David didn't follow, and Tina stood alone, in the middle of the courtroom, realizing the door had closed, and she hadn't been holding the knob. The sound of breaking ceramic came from the kitchen. Tina stood in front of an open cabinet, one hand full of mismatched dishes, the other trembling with rage. She yanked out a chipped dinner plate, paused, then hurled it into the trash can. The next one, blue with tiny floral etching, she slammed down harder, letting it crack in two. I'm not taking this crap with me, she muttered. David sat at the breakfast bar, arms slack, eyes blank. A glass of whiskey, half-melted ice, untouched, sweated onto a coaster. He hadn't packed a single box. You could help, you know, Tina snapped, slamming another drawer. But no, you'd rather sulk like a damn teenager. David didn't look up. What's the point? You tell me, she hissed. You're the one who thought she wouldn't actually go through with it. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of lavender and old dust. Ella carried a small box into Maggie's bedroom. New towels, some fresh linens, a stack of neatly folded winter scarves. Not because Maggie was moving, but because she wanted her things right where they belonged. Need me to go through the attic next? Ella asked gently. Maggie stood at her dresser, smoothing the corners of a lace runner that had been there since 1985. Not yet. They worked in quiet rhythm. No urgency, no panic. Just calm preparation. The kind that doesn't come from fear, but from knowing exactly who you are and what you've survived. Downstairs, another bang echoed. Maggie didn't flinch. Later that afternoon, she moved room to room, like a queen walking through her own estate. In the living room, she adjusted the angle of a framed wedding photo. In the dining room, she wiped down the hutch with a soft cloth, tracing her fingers over the spot where Ella used to hide cookie crumbs. She didn't stop to dwell. The memories were already safe. It was the space that needed cleansing now. As she reached the laundry room, Carson appeared at the back door, holding a clipboard and a roll of contractor-grade packing tape. I heard the crash, figured it was either an accident or Tina pretending to be a victim again. Maggie opened the screen door. She's doing both. Carson stepped inside, set the supplies on the counter. If you need storage for anything, I've got half my garage cleared. You just say the word. Maggie looked at him and smiled, not with gratitude, but with understanding. They're the ones leaving, not me. He nodded. Still, offer stands. They shared a quiet moment as another cupboard slammed upstairs. She'll take her anger out on the walls next, Carson said. Just make sure you document everything. I already have. He smiled, then tapped the edge of the counter once before heading out. 7 more days, he said. Tick-tock. That night, Maggie stood by the window, one hand resting on the cool sill. Outside, the porch light illuminated the freshly swept steps. The trash bin was full. Bits of bubble wrap, broken mugs, a single high heel with the heel snapped off. Tina's packing style was less about organization and more about vengeance. Behind her, Ella spoke quietly. You think she'll leave on the last day? She'll leave the moment staying hurts her pride more than going, Maggie replied. And David? Maggie didn't answer right away, just stared at the dark yard beyond the light's reach. He's been leaving for years, he just didn't realize it. Ella stepped beside her, both of them silent for a long stretch. Then Maggie whispered, not to her, not even to the window, but to the stillness itself. 7 days left. She closed the curtains slowly, deliberately, then added, almost like a blessing or a curse, tables turned. By Wednesday morning, the house smelled like endings. Boxes lined the hallway like silent witnesses. The clink of glassware wrapped in newspaper came from the dining room. Tina's voice had gone hoarse from days of passive aggression, but her presence still carried like vinegar through steam. Maggie stood at the kitchen counter, phone to her ear, listening to Howard's calm, precise instructions. You're legally clear to change the locks once the sheriff confirms they vacated, he said. Don't wait. Do it that day, that hour. I won't, Maggie replied. She didn't write it down. She didn't need to. Do you want me to schedule a locksmith? No, she said, glancing through the window toward the neighbor's fence. I already have someone in mind. Carson arrived that afternoon, tool belt slung over one shoulder, business card tucked under one calloused hand. Local guy, I've used him for years, he said, handing over the card. Doesn't ask questions, won't blink at drama. Maggie accepted it with a nod. He'll get paid on time. He'll know that. She slid the card into her wallet behind her ID and next to the folded copy of the deed. They'll be gone Friday, she said. Carson adjusted his cap. Then Saturday morning, you'll be walking into a house that answers only to you." She didn't smile, but something shifted in her jaw. A release, a new stillness. That evening, Ella sat cross-legged on Maggie's bedroom floor, phone in hand, camera app open. She scrolled through storage space like a producer prepping a final scene. "Can I film when they leave?" she asked. Maggie folded a shawl and placed it into the cedar chest. "Yes. Just for us, not to post." "I know." Ella looked up. "You okay with it?" Maggie paused, then sat beside her on the edge of the bed. People forget what happened when no one records it. Ella locked eyes with her grandmother. They won't forget this. Friday came quietly. No shouting, no dramatic exits, no apologies. Tina dragged her final suitcase down the steps like it was filled with spite. David followed with a cardboard box of old tools and unopened mail. He didn't speak, didn't meet Maggie's eyes. At the front door, Tina turned. She scanned the room one last time, her sneer as practiced as her eyeliner, and muttered, "Paper plates suit you." Maggie tilted her head, unbothered. "Paper deeds suit me better." Tina's face twitched, but she didn't respond. She just walked out. Ella, sitting on the porch swing, phone in hand, recorded the door closing behind them. One clean shot. Unbroken. The sheriff, standing beside his cruiser at the curb, gave Maggie a short nod. "All clear," he said. "They're off the property. You're good to proceed." She nodded back. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, got in the car, and drove away. Saturday morning, the locksmith arrived at 8:03. He didn't say much, just examined the 3 exterior doors, checked the hardware, and got to work. The clatter of metal echoed through the hallways like music being tuned. Carson stood by the gate watching from a distance. Maggie brewed coffee while the locks turned one by one into something new. When the man finished, he handed her a set of matte silver keys, fresh cut, cold to the touch. "You're secure now." She took them in her palm, held them like heirlooms. "Thank you." As he packed up, Ella leaned against the doorframe, filming quietly. No dialogue, just the image of her grandmother turning the key in the new lock. Once. Firmly. Later, Maggie walked through the empty upstairs hallway. The air felt different, not lighter, not cleaner, but honest. No lies hanging in corners, no waiting for footsteps that didn't belong. She opened the linen closet, refilled the shelf with folded towels, closed it again. Back in the kitchen, she turned the key again. Click. Turn. Done. The locks didn't just hold, they sealed. At twilight, she stood on the porch alone. Ella had gone home. Carson had waved goodnight. The street was still, windless. Maggie exhaled once, deep, then whispered to the evening air, "Locks will sing the last verse." And behind her, the door clicked shut. No echoes, just peace. The sheriff arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. He stood at the edge of the lawn, arms crossed over his vest, mirrored sunglasses hiding any trace of sympathy. Behind him, the moving truck's engine idled like a waiting verdict. A pair of uniformed movers stepped out, young, efficient, and completely disinterested in the drama they were about to haul. Maggie stood just inside the screen door, keys in one hand, coffee in the other. She wore a pale gray blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back, her posture regal without trying. Ella sat on the porch swing, camera already rolling in her lap. "Ready?" Maggie asked. Ella nodded once. "Always." Inside, the air was already buzzing. Tina barked from the top of the stairs. "Do not put that box down there. That's fragile. Do you even know how to carry things that matter?" The mover didn't respond, just kept walking. David trailed behind, dragging 2 garbage bags full of his old clothes. He looked like a man trying to shrink. Like maybe, if he stayed small enough, he could disappear before the last page turned. The sheriff gave a curt nod to Maggie as he stepped inside. "Last check. All belongings out. Premises to be vacated today. Ma'am, do you confirm possession? Maggie's voice was calm. I do. Tina came thundering down the stairs, sunglasses on indoors, hair piled into a messy bun that didn't quite hide the panic underneath. This is illegal, she hissed. She's evicting her family. On what planet is that okay? The sheriff didn't blink. On the one where she owns the house. Another box hit the porch with a soft thud. Then another. Tina's carefully labeled handwriting, office, David's tools, misc decor, looked smug in Sharpie, but the cardboard sagged as if exhausted by the weight of pride. Neighbors had begun to gather. Two stood across the street, coffee mugs in hand. A couple more leaned against fences pretending to check mail. One older woman clapped quietly as the couch was rolled out the front door. Ella kept filming, her face blank, her lens steady. David paused on the front step, box in hand. He turned to Maggie. His voice barely rose above the creak of the moving dolly. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Maggie didn't look at him, didn't flinch. She sipped her coffee. I'm sorry, he added. Still, nothing. The movers walked around him, wheeling out a stack of plastic bins. One had the word kitchen taped crookedly to the side. A mixing bowl jostled loose and rattled against the edge. Tina spun around furious. Can't you people be careful? The mover shrugged. They're your boxes. Then, finally, the last one was out. The sheriff stepped forward. Keys, please. Tina froze. You're really doing this? She asked Maggie. No answer. David fished in his coat pocket, pulled out the tarnished house key, and dropped it into the sheriff's outstretched palm. Tina stared at him like he'd just sold her out. You coward. Then she turned to Maggie. You'll regret this. You'll die alone in this empty house. You think a deed gives you a legacy? It doesn't. It just gives you a headstone. Maggie stepped onto the porch, slowly. She handed her coffee to Ella, walked down the 3 steps, and stopped directly in front of Tina. Then she reached into her own pocket and pulled out a fresh key, polished, gleaming. I have my name, she said quietly, on the papers, on the door, and on the title. Tina didn't move. Dinner's over, Maggie whispered. So's your stay. She turned and walked back inside. The sheriff locked the door behind her. Click. The movers lifted the last box into the truck and rolled the door shut. Tina stood in the driveway, shaking. David didn't speak. And inside, Maggie pressed the new key into the brass lock, listening as the mechanism settled into place, final, firm, and free. Ella followed, one hand still clutching the phone. Outside, the neighbors had begun to walk away. Inside, the house was quiet. No bitterness, just air and ownership. The house was quiet now. Not the tense silence of before, the brittle, breath-held stillness that came with resentment and slammed doors. This was something different. Something full. Like a chord resolved. Maggie stepped inside alone. The click of the new lock behind her echoed down the hallway. Not sharp, not loud, just sure. She slipped off her shoes, placed them neatly on the mat. The floor beneath her feet felt clean, like it had finally exhaled. Light streamed through the windows. Dust motes danced in the golden beams that touched the oak banister and ran across the grain of the freshly mopped floors. Everything smelled like lemon oil and something older. Wood, maybe. Memory. She walked through the living room, fingers grazing the arm of the couch. The same couch, but different now. Not a thing fought over, claimed or defended. Just furniture again. Just hers. The locksmith emerged from the side hallway, wiping his hands with a small towel. All 3 doors are done, he said. Deadbolts, reinforced strike plates, keyed to match. These are yours. He handed her a small brass key ring. 4 keys, brand new. cool in her palm. She turned one over between her fingers, the ridges catching a glint of afternoon light. "Keep them safe," the locksmith said, packing up his bag. "Locks are solid, but peace of mind? That comes from knowing who holds the keys." Maggie nodded. "Thank you." He tipped his cap and left without another word. She stood in the foyer a moment longer, turning the keys in her hand. Then she set one aside, separate from the others, and placed it gently in the small ceramic bowl on the entry table. It clinked softly. Ella would know where to find it. The kitchen was spotless now, empty of boxes, noise, accusation. Only a tea kettle sat on the stove, humming faintly over low heat. Maggie poured a cup, not because she needed tea, but because it filled the space with intention, with ritual. She stirred in a single sugar cube, sat at the table, let it steep. The back door creaked open. Carson stepped in, holding a brown paper bag. "Brought you lemon muffins. Still warm. Don't ask how. They're from my daughter, not me." Maggie smiled. He looked around, eyes sweeping the trim, the crown molding, the polished floors. "House looks right again." "It feels right." "You did it," he said. Not surprised, just stating fact. "I did," she replied, then sipped. He set the bag down and nodded toward the window. "Street's quiet today, like it's watching its breath. Like it knows something's shifted." Maggie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Ella arrived just before sunset. She knocked softly, even though she had always been welcome. Maggie opened the door and stepped aside. Ella entered with cautious reverence, as if afraid to shatter the new calm. She took in the space, the gleam of the floors, the absence of shouting, the echo of peace. Then she saw the single key in the dish. Her eyes flicked to Maggie. "For me? If you want it." Ella didn't answer. She just walked over, picked it up, and held it like something sacred. Then she turned and hugged her grandmother, tight, arms wrapped full, no hesitation. Maggie let the tea cool on the table behind her, closing her eyes as she leaned into the embrace. Ella whispered, "Finally." Maggie nodded, just once. The sun had nearly set when she walked the rooms again. One last time, but not out of habit. Out of ownership. She stopped in the hallway outside the bedroom. The floor creaked in a way she knew by heart. The photograph frames had all been wiped clean. The house didn't just look whole. It felt like it remembered her. She smiled faintly at the polished wood beneath her feet, the way light flickered off the baseboards. Then, to no one at all, and everyone she'd ever had to outlast, she whispered, "Home retaken. Heart steady." Behind her, the kettle let out one final breath of steam, and the house held it. Maggie lit the last candle just as the clock struck 6. The dining room glowed, not with opulence, but with care. Polished wood gleamed under the warm flicker of taper flames. The table had been set with full china, cream-rimmed plates with gold edging, linen napkins folded into precise triangles, and silverware that had been shined until it caught the light like a whisper of memory. No paper, no shortcuts, no noise, just intention. Ella arrived first, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus, cheeks flushed from the early autumn air. "These are for the table," she said. "They're for the home," Maggie replied. Carson came next, carrying a small bottle of wine and a box of old black and white photographs tied with string. "Just thought these belonged here more than in my closet," he said, placing them beside the credenza. "And maybe the wine too, depending on how strong your tea is." Maggie smiled, soft and honest. "Tonight, the tea can wait." Neighbors trickled in shortly after. Mrs. Ramirez from 2 doors down, who had offered her porch fan during the blackout last summer. The Woos, who had slipped fresh spring rolls onto Maggie's porch last week without saying a word. All of them had seen too much, said too little, and stayed kind. When they sat, it wasn't with small talk, it was with presence. Ella helped carry out the serving dishes: roasted vegetables, crusty bread, a casserole made from Maggie's own recipe card, handwritten, curled at the corners. But it was the pie that made everyone pause. Maggie brought it out last. Pecan, of course, edges perfect, filling gleaming. She sliced with care, one piece, then another. Each set gently on porcelain, no cracking plates, no guilt trays passed under pretense. This wasn't about dessert, it was about dignity. When everyone had their plate, Maggie sat. Her hands rested gently on the linen napkin in her lap. She didn't raise her voice to command attention. She didn't need to. Still, the room quieted. She looked around the table, eyes full of stories, chairs full of presents. Not blood, maybe, but kinship just the same. Then she spoke, soft but unshaken. Respect is never leftovers. A few heads dipped. One neighbor reached for a glass. Ella smiled. Carson lifted his fork and gave a quiet, satisfied grunt. "Well," he said, "this tastes better than justice." Almost. Maggie lifted her water glass. Not wine, not tonight, and held it just above her plate. "To good neighbors," she said. "To earned peace," Carson added. "To finally feeling welcome in a house you've always loved," Ella finished. The glasses clinked gently. Real crystal. A real toast. No one mentioned David. No one asked about Tina. But everyone knew. Later, when the plates were cleared and the pie was nothing but sweet crumbs, Ella leaned back in her chair, eyes a little misty. "This," she said, "feels like the house exhaled." Maggie nodded. She folded her napkin, placed it neatly beside her plate, and let her gaze travel across the room, every corner dusted, every shadow cleared. Then, as the candle wicks flickered low and the night wrapped its arms around the old house, Maggie whispered to the table, to the floorboards, to the memory of every slammed door and quiet tear. "Eviction tastes sweeter than dessert." And then, her voice, firmer now, a sentence that didn't need to be explained. "And when they served me leftovers on paper plates," she said, setting her empty porcelain dish aside, "I answered with paper they never forgot. The eviction notice that sent them packing." The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone chuckled. Then they all did. And the house, whole again, held every sound like it had been waiting all along.